My sister-in-law pushed me down the stairs while I was pregnant, then told everyone I attacked her. I was 7 months pregnant when my sister-in-law shoved me down a flight of stairs and then stood over me, screaming for someone to call 911 because I'd attacked her. I want to be clear about something before I even start this story. I didn't lose the baby. I need to say that first because I know some of you are going to read that first line and brace for the worst, and I can't put you through 14 paragraphs of that fear. My daughter is fine. She's sleeping in the next room right now, actually, which is the only reason my hands are steady enough to type this out. But what happened after I hit that landing? What my husband's family chose to believe, who they chose to protect, and what it took to prove the truth, that's the part I actually need to get off my chest tonight. I'm Rachel, I'm 31. I married my husband, Mark, 4 years ago. Mark is one of 3 kids, he's the middle child, sandwiched between his older sister Denise and his younger brother Colin. Denise is 38. For most of the time I've known her, she's been perfectly pleasant to me. A little cool, a little formal, but nothing I'd call hostile. She'd hosted Thanksgiving twice. She sent a genuinely thoughtful gift when Mark and I got married. I had no reason to think there was anything simmering under the surface. What I didn't fully understand, because Mark's family doesn't talk about hard things, they just quietly reroute around them, was that Denise had spent almost a decade trying to have a baby. 3 rounds of IVF, 2 losses I only found out about later. And about 18 months before I got pregnant, Denise and her husband Ryan had finalized a divorce that came with a custody arrangement for their one living child, a little boy named Theo, who was 5 at the time. Denise got Theo every other week. Ryan got him the rest. From what Mark told me in the vague, half-sentence way his family tells you anything, the custody split hadn't gone the way Denise wanted. She'd wanted primary custody. The court, after an evaluation that apparently raised some concerns about her mental health and drinking during the divorce proceedings, gave her 50-50 instead, with a clause that let Ryan request a review if there were any further incidents. I didn't know what incidents meant. I still don't have the full list, but I knew Denise loved that boy more than anything in the world, and I knew losing half of him had broken something in her that never really got put back together. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday in March. Mark cried in the Target parking lot. It was, up until 3 months ago, the happiest day of my life. I told Denise myself, at a family dinner, because Mark wanted her to hear it from me directly instead of secondhand. I remember her face doing something strange, a smile that arrived about a half-second too late, like she'd had to manually build it. "That's wonderful," she said. And then she excused herself to the bathroom for almost 10 minutes. I didn't think anything of it. I do now. The small things started around my 4th month. Denise began showing up to family events with Theo more often, not her scheduled weeks, just extra visits, extra photos posted, extra mentions of quality time. At first I thought it was sweet. Then I noticed the captions always seemed to be timed to whatever I'd just posted. If I posted an ultrasound photo, within hours, there'd be a new photo of Denise and Theo baking cookies. Caption something like, "Grateful every single day for this little guy, blue heart." Mark noticed it too, eventually, though he was slower to than I was. "She's just having a hard time," he'd say. "Try to be patient with her." I was patient. God, I was so patient. At my baby's shower, which Denise attended, and which I specifically didn't ask her to help plan because Mark's mother, Carol, gently suggested it might be a lot for her, Denise gave a toast. It started off normal. And then, about halfway through, she said, and I remember this word for word because it silenced the entire room, "Not everyone gets the ending they're promised. Some of us just have to watch other people get handed things we begged for." Then she smiled, raised her glass, and said to Rachel, like she hadn't just detonated a grenade in the middle of my own baby shower. Carol laughed it off, a tight, nervous laugh, and quickly moved us into opening presents. Mark pulled me aside afterward and apologized on Denise's behalf, which bothered me more than the toast itself. He wasn't defending her. He was managing me. Managing the situation so it would go away quietly, the way his family managed everything. I brought it up to him again a week later. He sighed and said, "She's my sister, Ratch. She's going through the worst thing that's ever happened to her. Can you just give her some grace? For me." So I did. I gave her grace. I gave her so much grace, I started apologizing to her for things that weren't my fault. I stopped posting ultrasound pictures where Denise could see them. I stopped mentioning names we were considering. I made myself smaller in my own pregnancy because I didn't want to be the reason my husband's sister felt worse than she already did. It didn't help. If anything, it got worse, because now she knew I'd noticed, and knowing that seemed to make her angrier, not more careful. At 6 months pregnant, I found out through Colin, who let it slip and then looked immediately like he regretted it, that Denise had lost another custody review. Ryan had filed for a modification after Theo came home from one of Denise's weekends with a story about Mommy falling asleep in the car at the grocery store, and Theo having to knock on the window of a stranger's car to get help. The judge granted Ryan additional supervised visit conditions for Denise going forward. The same week that happened, Denise started texting me, not hostile texts. Worse than that, performatively warm ones. "Thinking of you and the baby today, 2 hearts," texts that arrived at 1 a.m. "I hope you know how loved you are," texts that felt less like affection, and more like she was rehearsing lines for a version of herself she couldn't actually be. I mentioned to Mark that I was starting to feel genuinely uneasy, not annoyed, uneasy, and for the first time he didn't brush it off completely. "I'll talk to her," he said. He never got the chance. It happened on a Sunday, at Carol and her husband's house, the same house Mark grew up in, a big old colonial with a steep, narrow staircase that Carol has been saying she wants to carpet, one of these days, for 20 years. I was 31 weeks along. We were there for a low-key family dinner, me, Mark, Colin, Carol, and Denise, who'd brought Theo. I went upstairs to use the bathroom around 6 p.m. Denise was already up there. I later learned she'd gone up a few minutes before me to check on Theo, who wasn't actually up there. He was downstairs with Colin the entire time. I don't remember every second of what happened next with total clarity, because it happened fast and because I hit my head on the way down, but I remember this clearly. I came out of the bathroom into the hallway, and Denise was standing right outside the door, too close, in a way that immediately made every hair on my arms stand up. "Can we talk?" she said. Her voice was wrong. Flat and too calm, the way people get right before they stop holding something in. "About what?" I said, and I took a step back toward the top of the stairs because every instinct in me wanted distance. "About how you get to keep everything," she said. "The husband, the house. The baby that's actually going to stay in your life. Do you have any idea what that's like? To watch someone who did nothing to deserve it just get handed the exact thing that was taken from me." I told her I was sorry, genuinely sorry, for everything she'd been through. And that none of it was a competition, and that I loved Theo too. I was trying to de-escalate. I was also, at this point, standing at the very top of a narrow staircase, 7 months pregnant, with my hand barely touching the railing. She stepped closer. I stepped back to keep distance between us. My heel found air instead of floor, and then her hand was on my shoulder, not steadying me, pushing, and I was falling. I don't remember the fall itself in order. I remember the ceiling. I remember my hip. I remember landing on the bottom 2 steps and the hallway floor, on my side, curling instinctively around my stomach even as everything else in me went white with pain. And then I remember Denise at the top of the stairs, screaming, not "call an ambulance," not "oh my God," screaming. She attacked me. She came at me and I had to push her off. Colin got to me first, then Mark. Then Carol, who took one look at her daughter, hysterical, pointing down at me, insisting I'd lunged at her and she'd only pushed me away in self-defense. And I watched, from the floor, in shock. In pain, terrified for my baby, as my mother-in-law's face shifted from panic into something closer to belief. The ambulance came. So did the police, because a 911 call involving a physical altercation automatically brings them. At the hospital, while a monitor strapped to my belly searched for our daughter's heartbeat, an officer stood at the foot of my bed and asked me, gently but directly, whether I wanted to press charges against my sister-in-law, or whether I understood that she was alleging I had initiated physical contact with her first. I said, from a hospital bed, with an IV in my arm and my husband's hand shaking in mine. She pushed me down the stairs while I'm 7 months pregnant. And you're asking if I attacked her. My daughter's heartbeat came back on the monitor about 90 seconds later. Strong, steady. I have never in my life heard a sound that undid me the way that one did. But Denise's version of events was already loose in the world. And in my husband's family, once a story starts moving, truth becomes a secondary consideration to keeping the peace. The next 2 weeks were, honestly, worse than the fall itself. Carol called me not to ask how I was, not first anyway, but to say she was sure this was all a terrible misunderstanding, and to gently, so gently, ask if I'd consider not pursuing anything with police, for the sake of the family and for Theo, who doesn't need to see his mother go through something like that. Mark, to his enormous credit, did not waver on my behalf, but even he kept saying things like, I know my sister. And I know she wouldn't have meant to hurt the baby, as though intent to hurt the baby specifically was the bar for what had happened being unacceptable. I was on modified bed rest. I had a hairline fracture in my wrist from bracing my fall, deep bruising along my hip and ribs. And the thing that actually kept me up at night, 48 hours of monitoring, to make sure the placenta hadn't been compromised. I lay in that hospital bed, and then in my own bed, replaying Denise's hand on my shoulder over and over, and I knew what had happened. But knowing wasn't enough. Colin hadn't seen it. Mark hadn't seen it. It was Denise's word against mine, in a family that had spent 30 years choosing the version of Denise's stories. Here's the detail that changed everything, and it's the part I still can't quite believe. Carol's house has a doorbell camera, cheap, motion-activated, mounted on the front porch, mostly there for package deliveries. It doesn't cover the staircase. But it does cover the driveway and part of the front window, which faces directly into the front hallway. Colin, 3 days after the fall, half out of guilt and half out of genuine confusion about what he'd half heard from the kitchen, asked Carol if he could look at the footage, not because he doubted me, he told me later, but because he wanted to understand the timeline, wanted to know if he could have gotten upstairs faster. The camera hadn't captured the push, but it had captured audio, tinny, but audible through the old, poorly insulated front window, which was cracked open that evening because Carol likes fresh air while she cooks. You can hear Denise's voice. You can hear mine. You can hear, 4 seconds before the sound of me falling, Denise say, "You have no idea what I'm capable of when I've already lost everything." And you can hear, immediately after the crash, before anyone else was in earshot, a full 3 seconds of silence, and then Denise's scream beginning, already at full, rehearsed volume, "SHE attacked me." 3 seconds. Long enough to look down the stairs at me, decide what story she needed the world to hear, and start performing it before a single other person arrived. Colin sent me that clip at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday with the text, "I am so sorry. I should have believed you immediately. I'm calling Mark right now." Here's the part that made everything click into place, though the part that turned this from a family tragedy into something the district attorney's office took seriously the moment they heard it. When I gave that audio clip to the detective handling my case, along with my medical records, she asked me a question I wasn't expecting. Had Denise ever had any prior incidents involving physical altercations reported to police or child services? I said I didn't know. I genuinely didn't. It turned out, and this only came out because the DA's office pulled records once charges were being considered, that 18 months earlier, during the custody proceedings, Ryan had filed an incident report after Theo came home with a bruise on his arm and told his father, in the careful, halting way 5-year-olds describe things. That mommy pushed me because I wouldn't stop crying. Denise had claimed Theo tripped. There were no witnesses. Nothing came of it beyond a note in the custody file, and the additional supervised visit condition Colin had mentioned to me months earlier. The incidents Clausmark had been so vague about. I hadn't known the word incidents had a name and a face and a bruise attached to it. This wasn't a woman who snapped once, in a moment of unbearable grief. This was a pattern the family had spent years quietly absorbing and reframing. She's struggling. Give her grace. She'd never really hurt anyone, because looking directly at it would have meant. Admitting Denise needed a kind of help nobody in that family was willing to force on her. I wasn't the first person Denise had pushed. I was just the first person with a doorbell camera pointed at the right window. Denise was charged with felony assault and reckless endangerment of a pregnant victim. The second charge carries enhanced penalties in our state, specifically because of the risk to the fetus. Something the DA explained to me in a tone that made it clear she took it very seriously. Denise's attorney initially pushed the mutual altercation, self-defense story, but between the audio, my medical records timestamped to the exact hospital arrival. And critically, Ryan's prior incident report establishing a pattern, that defense fell apart fast. 4 months after the arraignment, Denise took a plea deal. Guilty to felony assault, with the reckless endangerment charge factored into sentencing rather than tried separately. She got 18 months, with a portion suspended, 3 years of probation, mandatory anger management and mental health treatment. And the part I actually think matters most for Theo, a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation as a condition of any future custody modification. Carol did not come to the sentencing. She sent Mark a text saying she couldn't watch her daughter be treated like a criminal, which, even now, tells you almost everything you need to know about where her loyalty defaults to when it's tested. Mark did come. He sat next to me in that courtroom, 7 days after our daughter was born, holding my hand the exact same way he'd held it in that hospital bed, and when the judge read the sentence, he put his head down and cried, not for Denise, he told me later, but for every year he'd spent making excuses for a pattern he'd been too close to see clearly until it landed on his own wife. Update 3 months later. My daughter, Josephine, is doing beautifully. 9 pounds now, ridiculous cheeks. A scream that could probably be entered as evidence in someone else's assault case someday if she keeps this up. Colin has become, unexpectedly, one of the most important people in my life. He calls every week just to check in, and he's the one who drives Theo to and from his supervised visits with Denise now that Ryan has primary physical custody, while the court evaluates next steps. He says Theo asks about Josephine constantly and has started calling her my cousin baby, which is objectively the best thing I have heard all year. Carol reached out once, about 6 weeks ago, a long, careful email that was about 40% apology and 60% explaining why she'd reacted the way she did. I wrote back one paragraph. I told her I understood that watching your child face real consequences is its own kind of grief, but that I needed her to understand something too. The version of keeping the peace she'd practiced for 30 years hadn't protected anyone. Not Theo, not Denise, who never got the intervention she actually needed until a courtroom forced it on her. And not me, 7 months pregnant at the bottom of her staircase, while her first instinct was to ask whether I planned to press charges instead of asking whether I was okay. I don't know if that relationship fully heals. Right now, we send photos of Josephine on holidays, and that's about the size of it, and honestly, that might be enough for a while. Denise is 6 months into her sentence. Mark has gone to visit her twice, not to forgive, he says, but because he refuses to become the version of his family that disappears the second something is inconvenient. I haven't gone, and I'm not sure I will, not yet, but I did write her one letter. I told her that I hope the treatment she's required to get is treatment she actually lets herself receive, because somewhere under everything that happened on that staircase, There's a little boy who still needs a mother capable of being safe for him. As for me, I go up and down our own staircase at home every single day now with Josephine in my arms, and every single time, for just a second, my whole body still braces. I don't know when that stops. Maybe it doesn't, not completely. But I keep climbing anyway, because the alternative is letting one Sunday evening decide how I move through the rest of my house, my life, and my daughter's childhood, and I already gave that family enough of my patience for free. I'm done being quiet to keep other people comfortable. This is me, finally, getting louder.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more fascinating Reddit tales, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to Archives of Reddit. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.